Oh, yeah. So we'll just be catching up from where we stopped talking about assessment and the document. And the document we're still looking at is the News 2 chart. From our previous video, we looked at the News 2 chart, but we stopped at the air or oxygen. We talked about respiration and the SPO2, which is scale 1 and scale 2, and then we talked about air or oxygen. Before I go on, my name remains Bella Global, and I am your OSCE trainer, your go-to OSCE trainer for your own success, right? Okay, so let's continue with looking at the News 2 chart. The blood pressure. Some people look at this blood pressure chart and looking at where they are coming from, they marvel because they're like, no, how can a blood pressure of 160 or 180 be a zero? How can a blood pressure with a systolic of 160 be a zero or 180? Hey, remember, I always say to candidates, that which you knew before is gone. That which you have to do now is here and you use. Again, we work with evidence. It's always an evidence-based practice, okay? Evidence-based practice, this has come out from research, study, and all of that. So it's used as an evidence for practice. So it's, when we talk about best practice, okay? So a lot of work has been put into this chart. So it's quite appropriate, okay? So let's get back into looking into our charts and how we work with this. So for the blood pressure, if we look at should I call it the red zone, a blood pressure of 50 and below. Now, no, let me take it the way we can understand. It's on the left side, it's written blood pressure, millimeter mercury. Scores uses systolic BP only. Okay, that's quite explicit, quite explanatory. It says only score the systolic BP, because some people think, okay, so if it's just the systolic, it means I will only represent the systolic in the chart. No, that's not what it means. You will still represent your blood pressure with your top arrow, the straight line, or a broken line, however you need to represent it with, and the bottom arrow. Okay? I know some test centers are keen on the symbol to use. So depending on where you're testing, please just check out their website if they've got a sample, a format for you to use. I know one of the test centers used to have a format to use, okay? So for the blood pressure, the systolic is represented by the top arrow, which is like the top of an A. That's what the systolic BP represents. While the diastolic is represented by the V. And in between the A, which is that, and the V is a straight line. I hope you got that. Good. Now, so if we say the blood pressure of a patient is 180 over 78, it means the systolic represented by the A, that's the top, the arrow, will fall in the gray area. Now, the gray area, remember what it represents? It represents an O, a zero. Okay? Right. So the gray area represents the zero score. However, once you get to the diastolic, which may be a 78, it doesn't matter anymore. So even if it falls in the yellow, orange, or gray, or the red zone, it does not score anything. I'll take that again. Let's assume a patient's blood pressure is 172/86. It means 172 can be found between 161 to 180, which is the systolic. And now, if you look at the area of 161 to 180, it means that systolic scores a 0 because it fell in the gray region. Remember the column? Yes. And then the diastolic, which is 78, will fall in the range of 71 to 80. However, it looks like it's in the red zone. Remember, we only score the systolic. So that diastolic scoring is ignored. So what score do we give our systolic here? It's a 0, the blood pressure. Now, example 2. If the blood pressure was 108, 108 over 54. Remember, we work with the systolic BP. 108 falls in the range of 101 to 110. And that shows it's in the yellow zone, which is a 1. Okay? I would encourage us to get this chart. You can download them. You can use it to practice. It will do you a whole lot of good. Okay? So the 108 falls in the row of 101 to 110. And that's caused a 1. And now it's caused a 1 because that is the systolic. And that's how we go. However, the systolic, which could be a 65, doesn't score anything, even if it falls in the range of in the red zone, which people are looking at. Oh, isn't it a 3? No, it's not, because we don't score the diastolic. So with this, wherever the top of your arrow is where we score. That's where we focus on, and that's what the blood pressure simply is. It's quite easy to understand, easy to chart. Okay? So if there was a blood pressure of, say, 230, it means it has gone, the systolic has gone above 220. That is a score of 3. Why? Because that is the systolic. Okay, of course, we don't hope to get that as a diastolic anyway. So a blood pressure with a systolic of 230, 110, immediately we know that the top of the arrow, represented by the top of an A, falls in the range of 220 or equals to 220, which automatically is a 3. Okay? And that is what will give you a score in your blood pressure. Right. I hope we're clear with this. If you were not, if you ever struggle, please comment. I'll respond to your questions. Right? So the same thing, if a patient's blood pressure, a patient who is hypovolemic or something, the blood pressure may be 94/55. Now it means the systolic is 94. So if the systolic is 94, it means it falls in the orange zone between 91 to 100. So the systolic area there, which is 91 to 100, it falls in the orange zone, and the score will be a 2. So we're not doing anything with the diastolic. However, we are just representing it there. So we need to make sure we put in our arrows, top arrow, bottom arrow, line in between to connect the arrows. Right? So that's the symbol for BP. Onto pulse, or what you call heart rate. Right. If we look at the heart rate, again, it's represented by the white zone, yellow zone, orange zone, and the red zone. All right. So I just think for this, the red zone simply means danger, danger, danger. Something is going wrong. Okay. So if a patient, let's assume the patient's pulse was 78. The pulse is represented by a thick dot and will be in the row of 71 to 80. Okay? It will be in the row of 71 to 80. Why? Because it's 78. Remember, it's a range. We need to stick with the range. So it's not going to be on the line. Let's keep with the range and stay in the middle of that box. So if a patient's pulse or heart rate is 78, is in the white zone or what you call the gray zone, it will be scored a 0. However, if the patient's pulse rate was 106, it will be in the yellow zone, and that score is a 1. It's quite evident. It's in your charts. Just have a look at it. Okay? Or if a patient's pulse rate was 123, it's going to be in the range between 121 and 130. And that's still the orange zone. And the score is a 2. Right. Good. However, if the patient's pulse rate was a 48, lower down in the yellow zone, the patient scores a 1. Okay? Your pulse is quite easy, self-explanatory. Know the representation, but please just put your symbol properly. Let's go to the D. Sorry about that. I think I've got a need to call that. In the D, which is consciousness, it says score for new onset or of confusion. No score if chronic. Now, there is a scenario going on where people are saying, is it a new confusion? Is it a chronic? All of this information you have to get from your scenario. Read your scenario, understand what your scenario says, and then you will know if it's a new onset of confusion or is chronic, meaning it's been there a long time. Okay, if it's there a long time, there's no point trying to score the patient confusion or a 3. Why? Because that's like the patient state. However, a common mistake people make when it comes to charting for consciousness, which is disability, the D, especially when the patient is alert, most people want to put an A. If we look at the sample from test centers, it's a thick dot for alert. So whatever the patient is, if the patient is alert, confused, or responds to voice, or responds to pain, or is unresponsive, is represented by a thick dots. However, anything that falls from confusion to V to P or U is a 3, automatic. It's only when the patient is alert we score a 0 and is represented by a thick dot. In other videos, we may go down further into looking at the ACVPU, and we can break this down for better understanding on what to do in your assessment scenario. But for now, let's go on to temperature, which is the E, exposure. Remember, you use this for your A to E assessment. All of this is embedded. We'll talk about that later in another video. Temperature. The same thing goes, the range. So if the patient scores anything less than or equal to 35, it's automatic a 3. Okay, but it's represented again by a thick dot in the box. Okay, however, if the patient scores a temperature, let's say 35.8, that's a 1. Okay, it's a 1. It's just like a warning sign. Something is wrong. The temperature needs to come a little, up. Right? So, and that means we have to place this in the box of 35.1 to 36. So it scores a 1, which is the yellow zone. However, anything from 36.1 to 38 is a 0. Again, I know some people in their heads thinking, no, 37.8 is high. 37, come on. What you do in your home country, in your practice, is different. Let's accept the information we've got here. Let's accept and use this document because that's what we use, and that's what represents how things are seen here and how the patient will be monitored. Okay, So any temperature that falls between 36.1 and 38 is a 0. We put them again in the right column. However, if the patient scores, let's assume a 38.5, yellow light, warning sign, is a score of 1. Okay? So anything from 38.1 to 39 is a score of 1. But if the patient scores anything above 39.1 or equals to 39.1, is a score of 2, and that's the orange zone. The temperature charting is very easy, self-explanatory. You just need to understand the different ranges. Once you can understand how the ranges are, you know where to represent your figure. Again, it's represented with a thick dot, right? With this, we've covered everything in our A to E charting using the News 2 charts. Okay. So for the A to E charting, I mean basically the observations. I mean the numbers. We've covered that. But look just below the chart, you have the news total. We can't ignore that. I've done mock for some candidates, and in a hurry because they're rushing for time, somehow they skipped writing the total. I'm like, who does that? No, you can't skip total, So the news total is gotten from the addition of all of your figures. When you have written everything depending on what you score, remember all those numbers we got for your pulse, your temperature, your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation, the respiration. There are figures. Now, when you get all of these numbers, add them all up, it gives you a total, which you put in your news total. Get that? Good. Below that are boxes you can't ignore. So we have the monitoring frequency. We'll talk about monitoring frequency another time. You find that at the back of your News 2 chart, because the total you got from your News 2 determines how often you will go back to monitor your patient. And this also comes to play when you're talking about your planning. Escalation of care, yes or a no. So Y represents the yes and N a no. Anything above 0 is a yes. You have to escalate. But once your patient scores a 0, it's a no. So you represent by writing an N. You are not escalating. We'll talk about this when we look at the back of our News 2 chart, when we want to talk about escalation of care using the News 2 policy. And the last column here is the initials. You can't forget to put in your initials. You can't. You just can't do that. I was sharing with some candidates and saying, it's so sad when people, have to go and receipt just because they forgot to put their initials. You don't want to forget. I will say, best practice, once you get a document, please do all your short documents down there. Put your initials and just leave that there. Put your date and your time and your initials, and every other thing will come to play. Wow. With this, we've wrapped up the News 2 chat. I remember saying we'll have another video based on the SpO2, which is the target oxygen target saturation. We'll have that video, and then we could talk about other things. But please let me know if you've got any questions, if anything is not clear, if you're still struggling with some things in the gray area. Oh, Bella, please help. How do I go about this? Let me know. Put in your questions. I'll be there to respond to you. Till I come your way again, it's all my love.